All right, what is going on, everybody? How you doing? Welcome to another episode of Talking Buffalo, your weekday daily driver for Buffalo Sports Talk and more. My name is Patrick Moran. Thank you for listening, for watching, however you consume Talking Buffalo. I appreciate you very, very much. Also appreciate today's sponsors, Sunny Reds, 1531 Abbott Road, Lackawanna, about 5 minutes or so away from Highmark Stadium. Some of the best wings you're going to get anywhere in Western New York. Great pizza, great food, great drinks, great vibe. Big supporter of this show. So if you want to support this show and you're around that area, make sure you stop up to Sunny Reds. All right, so this is our Friday episode, recording this mid-afternoon-ish on Thursday. Brandon Beane spoke to the media this morning. Sean McDermott is literally wrapping up speaking as we're getting started here with this episode. And now that the season's over, like I've been telling you the last couple of days, it's time to start getting into more Buffalo Sabres talk. So to do all of that, I enlisted the help of somebody that I've known through social media for quite a while now, a guy that I respect very, very much. He has a blog called Two in the Box, also has a podcast, the Instigator Podcast. My man, Chris Ostrander. What's going on, dude? How you doing? Thank you for coming on the show finally. I should have asked you a million times. We've crisscrossed a little bit where I brought it up and then Bill season or whatever comes up, but this is the perfect time to have you on, man. How you doing?
Not too bad. I'm doing well. Thanks for having me. This is exciting.
I'm really pumped to have you on. For people, who are just diehard Sabre fans only, not really so much on the Bill side, who may not know you. On the hockey side, Two in the Box. You've been doing this blog now for a hot minute, man. When did you get started doing that blog? And I always got to ask this: why did you start, covering the Buffalo Sabres?
Yeah, no doubt. So, I've been doing it for 14 years now, 15 actually, I think.
Yeah.
So I started in 2010.
Mm-hmm.
And I started because I worked for both the Bills and the Sabres in college and right after. So I was a website content intern for the Bills going into my senior year of college, and then I got hooked up with the Sabres for my first year out of college, and it was almost all writing, PR, stuff like that. And so after that Sabres job, worked with Kevin Snow, Chris Bandura, Mike Gilbert. I was looking around career-wise, trying to figure out what I'm going to do. Wound up landing at the Olympics with NBC in Vancouver. Wow. And it was like through just connections that they had helped me make, and that Mike Gilbert was really helpful in getting me that gig. And so I get there, I'm like, I'm going to be here for a month. Like, I might as well blog, right? So I started a blog just to do it for the month I was up in Vancouver, just to kind of have fun with it. And I remember Kevin was like, you should keep doing this. This was like really good. So I got home, a couple months goes by, and like the summer of 2010, I was like, yeah, why not? I'll start this thing up. So I started up, and the rest is history. It's gone through a few iterations. Like, there was like, at one point it was just like a blog, just like covering anything and anything. Tried to do the Bills and Sabres thing for a while there, and then eventually just transitioned into Sabres coverage. That's what I ended up diving more into. I'm sure there's a parallel universe where I got, I have an all 22 subscription, and I'm trying to compete with the guys that cover one for like film breakdowns, but not in this timeline. So yeah.
So you're one of the few content creators out there who actually know what it's like to write about a team. I believe they were still in the playoffs, weren't they, when you first started? If you're going all the way back to
2007 was this Bills. It was the summer of 2007. So that was like Dick Duran, Craig Null, Trent Edwards, JP Lawson.
Oh yeah, the Bills sucked.
Oh, the Bills are terrible. Yeah, no, the Bills were awful. That was like that was the Marshawn Lynch, Paul Leslie summer. And so that was cool because like Lynch was a big story, right? But half of camp was like John DiGiorgio starting over Leslie, even though he didn't really deserve to. And then, but the Sabres, that they were right in that midst. Like, it was post Drury. I still remember I was like in the Bills office when Drury and Briere signed on that free agency day. But yeah, my Sabres year, they ended up finishing a few points shy. Miller had gotten hurt; he had a high ankle sprain, kept him out of the lineup for like a month, and that killed their season. So, unfortunately, no playoff run for me with the Sabres. So maybe I'm the bad luck charm. I'm not sure, but
I know a lot of your readership, they respect what you do and they know that it's a labor of love. You're not making a complete living doing that. Just like, I don't make a living doing this. 99% of people who have a podcast or a blog, they're not making a living doing it. In many cases, they could barely even pay their expenses, by doing it. It really truly is a labor of love. I think most people recognize it. There's some who don't, but for the most part, many people understand and respect that it is a labor of love and all the work that you put into it. Before we get into some Bills conversations, like I said, pressers from McDermott, presser from Beane, I want to get your takes and thoughts on some of those topics we'll bring up, and then we will talk some Sabres as well. The Instigator Podcast, I know you do that with Tyler. How did that start, and what got you interested in wanting to do that as a podcast?
Yeah, it's a good question. It was, when I started the blog and really got deeper into the Sabres side of it, probably, call it like 2012, maybe.
Mm.
It was Ted Black was with the Sabres then. They were doing the blog summits. So the blogger community, especially with the Sabres, was massive. I think at one point someone did, I think Kate Holzmer, I'm sorry, I can't remember the name of her site anymore. She counted like 75 Sabres blogs. There were like that many. It was just wild.
Wow.
And at the time I was like, I got to do something to like help differentiate myself more than what just the content I'm doing written. And Eric Schmitz, who at the time had a Sabres blog, he's a reform blogger now. He's got a big boy job. He and I were like, we lived close to each other. I was like, hey, you want to do a podcast? Like, let's screw around. Let's try this thing out. And I think our first episode was like an hour and 45 minutes long. It was ridiculous, but we refined it. We polished it. We did it for a few years before he moved on, because he had moved out of town. So he shut his site down. And then Tyler, who I've known since I was a kid, he stepped in and we kept it rolling. So, I've been doing the podcast probably for a good 10 years now as well. And that, at least in that neighborhood, just as, and again, another outlet. And a lot of times, honestly, like I'll have an idea for a blog post, and especially nowadays, I got 2 kids, they got a million activities, right? Like, I'm like,
Sure.
I got to try to sit down and write, 1,500, 2,500 words on something. Like, it's just not, the time's not always there, but like we can carve out an hour on a Tuesday night to record our show, and we can run through 15 topics, and it's just a lot faster. So it's become such a good outlet to just talk through stuff. It's been really nice.
It could be a podcast for a podcaster, can sometimes be therapeutic in a way. I honestly, the Bills losing this game this past Sunday, doing a live show with Joe from Queens on Sunday night and then having something else to follow it up on Monday, I was kind of talking my way through my despair, at least to some extent anyway, so it could be a little bit therapeutic. Now, what I did not know is you and Tyler have known each other since you were kids.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's cool because you kind of have a little bit of a natural, organic chemistry. I've always said this before. When you do a podcast, there's a lot of podcasters out there who, sometimes it's a solo show or somebody who has a variety of guests like I do, or 2 people who do a show together. You cannot fake, you cannot front when it comes to chemistry. You either you have it or you learn it over time, or you don't have it. You can't force it. You know what I mean? But clearly, if you know somebody since you were a little kid, you kind of have that natural, organic chemistry. It's kind of fun for you to be able to do something with somebody that you've known for that long, right?
Oh yeah, it's so cool because we rode the same bus. He grew up around the corner from me, playing street hockey down there in Lake Ridge in Orchard Park. And then we went our separate ways. He went to Franny's. He was a couple years behind me, maybe 1 or 2, I forget exactly. But we ended up reconnecting at that Sabres job. Actually, that I was my position was like graduate assistant,
Mhm.
which was just like a paid intern. And then Tyler had an internship because he was still in school. And it was like one of the first days, like you grew up in Lake Ridge. Like we connected the dots, and then we've been in touch. We stayed in touch since then. So it was a like a decade layoff, if you will, and then picked it back up when we were like 22 or 23, and just clueless as to what we were doing. But we were able to stay connected then, so which was great, like serendipitous for sure. And yeah, and then now we're able to do the show, and stay in touch at least on a weekly basis, if not more. So
Yeah, on this show from time to time has been a lot less frequently of late over the last year or so. But I got a buddy, Tone Puck, who I grew up with, and we've known each other since we were teenagers. We kind of had some of that chemistry, although we'd be fighting a lot on this show. Tone would be, you know, he wouldn't be opposed to throwing a couple back before he'd jump out with me, and then it just kind of became his own playground on this show, and then we would go back and forth. But people actually loved listening to that. All right, one more thing, and we'll get into this. I like spending when I get someone on for the first time, especially somebody who I think a lot of Bills fans, at least anyway, Sabres fans surely know who you are, but a lot of Bills fans may not know much, if anything, about you. But so you did grow up in this area. You said you're from Western New York. You're born and raised there.
yeah, Orchard Park. Grew up in Orchard Park, high school, Orchard Park, and then I went away to
Okay.
school. But I came back here. We live in Hamburg now. Yeah, it's a really lifelong Western New Yorker. So
So a Southtown boy, man.
yeah,
I grew up in the city, the west side of Buffalo, and it's funny because I live in the West Seneca now. I've been in the Southtowns pretty much since I got married, which is God, how long has it been now? 23 years ago. So I've been out here for literally almost half my life. But the Southtowns used to seem like another state. Like Orchard Park to me, when I was a little kid growing up on the west side, Orchard Park may as well have been Vancouver or Montana or something like that. It was just it was wild. But now I live, I don't know, 6 minutes from the stadium.
yeah,
Anyway, it's pretty wild. All right, so let's get into the press conferences from today. And look, I mean, nothing significant, I don't think, was really said. Nothing shocking, nothing that's going to make you go, oh my God, I can't believe Brandon Beane said that. I can't believe Sean McDermott said that. I don't think anyone realistically, you shouldn't have been anyway. Anyone should have thought that it was going to be something extremely revealing. But I did take down a couple notes and I wanted to get your thoughts on it. We'll start with Brandon Beane as well, because I thought he brought up some things that were pretty interesting anyway. And I also will give them credit. Brandon Beane sat there and fielded 43 questions from the media, and he spoke for an hour and 16 minutes. When you and I started recording this episode, Sean McDermott was right at about an hour, and he was still going. I don't know if he's still going now, but my point was these weren't these little quick bullet point, just give a couple quotes to the media and call it a day and move on. These guys, I give them credit. They both they sat there and they took a lot of questions, and I thought both of them had some pretty lengthy insightful answers. But anyway, with Brandon Beane, one of the things that I thought was interesting was with Keon Coleman. Let's start there, okay? He kind of mentioned that something I think we all suspected. Keon Coleman had a pretty good start to the year. He was starting to come on anyway, and then he got that injury against Miami when Jordan Poyer hit him as he was catching that football. He ended up missing almost, I think it was 4 weeks because of injury. And he talked about Keon Coleman not being the same player once he came back. I looked it up. He only had 10 catches for 161 yards and a touchdown in his last 7 games after coming back from injury, including the playoffs. Speak on that a little bit. Keon Coleman, like I said, he was starting to become a force on this team. That Seattle game, I felt like was kind of like his coming out party. Looked pretty good against Miami, and then he gets hurt. And I ask you this because there's a theme. We're also going to hit on Kincaid and Cooper. Injuries in the Bills' skill position pass catchers struggling to be able to come back from them was a pretty significant theme, I thought, from Brandon Beane. But let's start there with Keon Coleman. Did you kind of notice that he wasn't quite the same player coming back from the wrist injury?
It's interesting because I think, and this speaks to, like, the everybody eats mantra, right? But like, there would be games where I know people complain about Cooper not getting enough targets even too,
Mm-hmm.
but there'd be so many games where it's like, is Keelan Coleman playing today? And whether they weren't looking at him or he wasn't getting separation, whatever, he just he wasn't producing. And so, I mean, it at least tracks that maybe they didn't want to throw him as many contested balls if the hand or wrist was bothering him. Was there a crisis of confidence where he wasn't too sure about going up for some balls? I don't know. But definitely, I mean, certainly, the lack of production was obvious to me, and I think it probably goes for Cooper too. Um,
Sure, definitely.
Down the stretch, those two being like the two primary outside threats. Obviously Shakir able to work the middle of the field a little bit better, those underneath routes and things like that he really excelled at. But um, I mean, certainly watching that Kansas City game, I was like, man, either they're not willing to go down the field or they just can't do it. And it struck me that they were, that they weren't looking at those deeper patterns for the most part. I mean, obviously, like he hit Hollins on a couple, key passes, right?
Sure.
But and I really liked the one breakdown. I wish I remember who did it, but they did the breakdown on that Cooper screen pass where they talked about how they checked to it. Because in the moment you're watching it in the moment, I was like, man, it's an interesting play call given the where they are, situationally. But yeah, with respect to Coleman, it certainly it helps add up, right? It at least helps like give a little bit more context as to why he might have been, less of a factor for them in the passing game. But
One
it's hard to square it at the same time because like they don't have any game breakers, true game breakers at the
right.
receiver position, right? So when you have a guy, really scaled back the way he was, I mean, it just makes it that much more, obvious that they're, where they're short, where they're thin.
One catch for 5 yards against Denver, one catch for 5 yards against Baltimore, one catch for 12 yards against Kansas City. That was Keon Coleman's playoffs. Before going further, let me ask you this too. Does it feel, when you think of the offense, is it a little weird to you? Because look, we're going to talk about Cooper here in a second. We're going to get Dalton Kincaid. These guys who really underwhelmed. Keon Coleman coming back from this injury, really underwhelmed. Joe Brady, a lot of talk about being too conservative at times. Matt Collins really shouldn't be leading your team in receiving yards, yet he did that a handful of times this season. It was very rare when any receiver would break 100 yards receiving. James Cook often didn't get enough touches, including this game on Sunday. It kind of felt like there's so many variables where it's like, this offense shouldn't have been that good. But then you're like, this team scored 30 points or more, like 8 straight games or some crazy shit like that. They scored 27 against Baltimore. They scored 31 against Denver. 2 great defenses in the playoffs when it matters. And they scored 29 points against the Chiefs, another really good defense in the playoffs when it matters. So it's hard to be critical of an offense, again, when you score 31, 27, and 29 points in 3 playoff games against 3 of the best defenses in the league. But yet, is it weird to you? Because, like I said, there's just so many individual parts that feel like it could have been so much better.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's definitely like the results, what the box score shows, what their statistics are, EPA, what have you. And then versus like the vibes and how you feel watching them, I feel like are so at odds. Because even like that Denver game, I mean, I'm usually pretty chill when I'm watching a game. I don't get too nervous at any one point or time, but like it was a little touch and go, I think, against Denver before they finally broke it open.
Sure.
And I think they did a really good job neutralizing, a really quality pass rush, a really quality defensive team there. So I think they managed that matchup really well. But yeah, it's just, I think back to also like comparing it to like, like that 13 seconds game where that offense was just all gas, no breaks, right? Like
right.
They were passing to open up the run. They were stretching the field as best they could, and they were forcing teams to adjust to that. Whereas now it's it's a more methodical approach where you're going to hammer James Cook, you're going to hammer Ty Johnson and Ray Davis to try to open up that play action passing game. It's not as electric, that's for sure. But yeah, it is hard to argue with some of most of the results they've been getting because to your point, Pat, like the numbers were there, right? The production was there. It's just
team wise.
Yes, right, exactly. I guess like it almost just boils down to like your personal opinion or like philosophy on it. Like, do you want like a Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, where like that bell cow receiver, the top dog who's going to get a ton of touches, a ton of looks, or do you want that more, equitable approach where everyone's going to get some touches and looks and you never really know what they're going to exploit on a given week?
Sure. And look, maybe it's just because we've been used to Josh slinging the ball a lot more in recent years. It's like running the ball's boring, man, but it's effective. The thing was, it just felt like, and you saw it in the Chiefs game where the Chiefs offense just came natural and organic and easy. And it felt like the Bills were fighting and clawing for every single blade of grass offensively in this football game. But then you look and it's like, well, these mistakes happen, this and that. And guess what? They scored 4 touchdowns and had a field goal against the Chiefs. So, I mean, it's really tough. But anyway, I'm with Amari Cooper. Brandon Beane was speaking, and I thought this was a little bit revealing. We all know he hurt his wrist. He ended up missing 2 games, and he revealed that Amari Cooper could have had wrist surgery, but didn't want to. He played through it because he wanted to be out there to help the team. I'll say this too as a side note, and Brandon Beane kind of hit on this a little bit, but Amari Cooper really proved to be, if nothing else, a very unselfish player. Like I said, he could have he's getting paid. He could have shut it down, get his wrist surgery or whatever, but he wanted to win. He wanted to play through it. And in the playoffs, especially the first 2 playoff games where he was barely targeted at all, other number 1 receivers could have made issue with that, and he didn't at all. He even said he don't give any, I'm paraphrasing, but he didn't give a shit. He wants to win. He wants to win a championship. Playing in a championship game was as far as he's ever been. He could have complained, is what I'm telling you. You tried a 3rd round pick for me, and I'm getting 2-3 targets a game. Could have been an issue. It was not an issue, and that's a lot of credit to him. But the wrist injury, just like I said with the Keon Coleman injury that being talked about, that was a factor because I went and looked it up. It's 8 games he played after coming back, including the playoffs. 17 catches for just 214 yards. And 95 of those yards came against the Rams. He kind of got off a little bit against the Rams. So you take that game away, and he had like maybe 115 yards over 7 games, the rest of the games that he played in, man. It's, I don't know, Chris, just kind of wild to me that injuries. And we're going to get to Kincaid, which was the worst of all of them here in just a second. But did you expect more from Amari Cooper giving up a 3rd round pick? Are you happy with what you got for the Bills, or do you feel like he was underutilized? Because I find it hard to think that this guy like became almost washed up as soon as he put on a Bills uniform. Because statistically, that's almost what it looks like. He was borderline washed when the second he put on a Bills jersey. I know it's not the case, but it felt like that at times.
Yeah, that's a good question because again, like I think maybe like again relating it to the Keon thing, like those first few weeks they got him down the field, right? Few back shoulders down the field, couple go routes, like that touchdown against the Jets, which was pretty deep throw, right? Like he was doing some of the things I think that you acquired him to do: stretch the field, pull attention away defensively, and so. Not that you're going to trade a 3rd round pick for a decoy because that's a little silly, right? But like, he helped. I would certainly say he helped make the offense more threatening.
When he was out there,
yes, for sure. Like
it's not a lot.
Yeah, he definitely aided them in that respect. But I think what I just come back to is like you need a more dangerous weapon out there. And I would even like you can even I've seen plenty of people do it, but you can even go back to the draft where and the Worthy thing, like I think the Worthy thing is a little overblown, but like you're going to trade back. Like McConkey struck me as a more dynamic weapon, right?
Good separator, yeah.
Yes, and so without like that I think dynamics is probably the best word I would use for it. Like without that dynamic threat outside, they feel limited. Again, they look limited. It's like there were times like during the drought they'd be playing like whether it's Patriots or whoever, but like they would drop back to pass and it would feel like there were 12 guys in coverage and there was nowhere to throw the ball. And then on the flip side, Buffalo's on D and it feels like they have 12 guys in the pattern against Buffalo. So like there were times against KC where it felt like that where Allen's dropping back and I'm like, Jesus Christ, they're all covered. What is going on here? So
a lot.
Yes. Yeah. So, I know Kincaid was maybe supposed to be a little bit of that, that dynamic threat. We haven't seen it yet. Will we see it? I don't know. But yeah, like Cooper, I think like there were some signs that he could do it. And not to jump to too many conclusions. I just wonder, maybe given the philosophy of the offense, did they want to stick with what got them there? And so they're like, okay, we want another weapon. We need another threat, especially because Curtis Samuel was so quiet in the first half of the season, especially, and Cooper helped them in that respect, but by no means did he make their offense, I think, like worlds better. I just think he just added another wrinkle. So
it's, you say kind of like dance with what brought you. And part of me wants to be like, well, man, I think that hurt you against the Chiefs because there were no new wrinkles. There were no things that they needed to try that they didn't. Some things they could have done, I should say. But again, it's such a thin line because I'm like, all right, you scored 29 points. You also had the ball in your hand with 3 timeouts and 3 minutes left and an opportunity to potentially win the game. I'm going to say the Bills score and they win the game for sure. You never know how it plays out. But they got to where they, if you would have signed up before the game, Josh Allen's got the ball. It's a 1-score game. You're down 3 timeouts. I know you're going to take that. I know I would as well. So it's hard to be ultra critical of stuff like that. But it's just weird. Like I said, all right, so with Dalton Kincaid, Brandon Beane talked about, which maybe Beane saying it himself didn't register with me too much, but also Sean McDermott a couple hours later kind of reiterated some of the same things with Dalton Kincaid. Getting banged up was definitely a factor. Being injured was definitely a factor. But they have both talked about him not being strong enough. He needs to get stronger and more durable, and that's how he's going to stay healthy. They were both insinuating that 2 years in the NFL now, Dalton Kincaid is still not physically where he needs to be. I thought that was pretty telling. And when it comes to the other two guys, I think Amari Cooper did what the Bills was asked of him. I think in a different scenario, maybe a different Joe Brady mindset, Cooper could have been more than a factor than he was. They just didn't need him to be. Keon Coleman, I think, is the type of player. I don't think he's ever going to be a 85 catch guy. He's going to be a guy who can jump balls, who can get down the field when plays break down. And when you got Josh Allen, that happens a lot. He can he can improvise really well. I don't know that he's not your separating type, consistent route runner. I expected a lot more now. 2 years in, again, Keon's just a rookie who got hurt in his rookie year. Dalton Kincaid is 2 years in. And I'm going to lump both seasons in because I think he's been mostly underwhelming. 2 years in now, he's had 0 games with 90 yards receiving in a game. He has not had a 90-yard receiving game in his career. He's only had 53 yards was his best output this whole season. And now he's played in 2 playoffs, 5 games, and he's got just a $175 receiving yards in 5 playoff games. So he's only averaging 35 yards a game receiving in 5 playoff games now for the Buffalo Bills. That's not good enough. And 2 years might be a little too early to worry, but are flags raised with you that this guy may be kind of a tweener because he's not athletic and good enough to be a receiver, but he's also not big and strong enough to be a tight end. He was classified as a weapon when the Bills drafted him last year, but weapons get 90 yards receiving at some point in their career and average more than 35 yards a game. What's your level of concern right now about Dalton Kincaid after a second season? And one other point I'll make too, Dawson Knox is literally playing more than him, and that's been a pattern. Right. So anyway, what's your level, if any, of concern with Dalton Kincaid based on Brandon Beane talking about him needing to be stronger or just his production through 2 years?
This may be slightly colored by the fact that he dropped that ball on Sunday, but high because like games in your hands. You said it, Pat. Like you get a quarterback like Josh Allen, you get it right, and it's like, okay, we're in a championship game. We're in a situation to win this thing. We have all of our timeouts. We just got a stop, right? They kicked a field goal, so you got the stop you needed to put yourself in the position to win. That's what you want offensively. Again, like going back to 13 seconds, like you would have thought that they didn't leave enough time, right?
Right.
They executed the way that you needed to with your superhuman quarterback. And so to go get to spend a pick in the first round on a luxury, I would say, in terms of what Kincaid is,
yes,
a supposed matchup nightmare tight end, and then to not utilize him that way, because I do think like some of it does lie in the fact that they have not, whether through his own shortcomings or their decision making, they have not wanted him to be the focal point of their offense, which is fine. Like that's understandable. But he's just not, and it's not to say that he needs to be Travis Kelce. I think, again, that he's kind of a generational tight end talent, but like you went out and got this guy first round pick because of all of these physical traits he had, all of these things that make him, consider him a wide receiver, right? That was the quote. And he's been a very average pass catching tight end. And in a lot of ways, I think back to before they drafted him, like what Dawson Knox did well, I thought he was putting himself in the conversation to be one of the more threatening tight ends in the league. And the fact that he is kind of a dual threat, you can put him in line and he's going to block for you, but he is also athletic enough to go out and be a bit of a mismatch in the on a route tree. So like, it's really hard to have confidence in what Kincaid brings to the table because of how they've used him, but his production, he's not been very impressive to me at all. And again, they invested a lot in this guy to bring him in, and now it's like, oh geez, like, okay, what is he doing for you?
Yeah, what he should have done is catch the football because that's what a guy who's a game-changing type player is going to do. And I know some people will say, well, it's unreasonable or unfair. Wasn't an easy catch. You had to come back a little bit. Catch the football. That's the reason why they drafted you in the first round. And before we get to break, I'll say this too with Brandon Beane. This is what scares me about Brandon Beane a little bit. Not to get into Brandon Beane, I don't want to put his career now into a conversation today, but I will say, you go back a couple years ago, they wanted McDuffie. The Chiefs go up, they get McDuffie, and he still wanted that position, and he took Kyrie Elam. That has proven to be an absolute unmitigated disaster of a draft pick at this point. And then you go back to that 2023 draft. It's pretty well known the Bills needed I said a wide receiver. Some people now say weapon or pass catcher, but they got to, and I just wanted to look it up because I wanted to make sure I had the names right. So it gets to pick 21. They're all on the board, and the Bills were at, where were the Bills? They were at 27. But back to back, Quentin Johnson goes to the Chargers, Zay Flowers goes to the Ravens, and Jordan Addison goes to the Vikings. And then bam, holy shit, all of a sudden the receivers are off the board. We're going to be left out. Well, let's pivot. Let's move up 2 spots with the Giants, and let's go get Dalton Kincaid, and we'll call him a weapon. When you already had Dawson Knox, who I thought had established himself not as an elite tight end by any means, but as a rock-solid tight end, and you paid him accordingly, too, a nice big contract, and you signed a tight end. It just always felt a little bit off to me, and we'll see. I mean, he's got the physical ability to still be a really good player, but I'll say this, and I'm sure you agree, Dalton Kincaid's got a lot to prove going into to year 3. Anyway, I take a real quick break, come back on the other side. A couple more things that being said about the defense. Sean McDermott, and then maybe we'll talk about the actual. So I wanted to get you on the podcast primarily to begin with some Sabres talk. All coming up right after this quick break. All right, I am back with Chris Ostrander from Two in the Box, also the Instigator Podcast. We'll get to the Sabres eventually.
You sound like Terry Pagula.
Yeah, I am being like Terry Pagula. I was going to ask you, I was already getting ready to ask you about something with Terry Pagula related, but we'll save that for Sabres talk. It sounded to me like, and again, I also know smoke screen season, like literally officially begins now for GMs and coaches. They don't want to give away what they're up to. I got a sense, and this was just my own personal sense, it didn't sound like Beane was urgent to make a big move, especially on the defensive line. I know he was asked about that a couple times, where Sean McDermott was a little more surprisingly poignant about the defensive line play, and I'll get to that in just a second. I do get a sense, and he also said, by the way, Brandon Beane did say specifically he doesn't think they're one player away, and he said having that mindset can be very dangerous where you go and, you think you're one player away, see no further than Von Miller. They spent a shitload of money for back in 2022, which I also got the sense that Von Miller, I almost talked about him past tense, I want to say. That was my interpretation. I could easily be wrong, but you look at his contract and stuff. Last thing I'll ask you about Beane and Vaughn is, do you think Von Miller's played his last game in Buffalo? And if you were in that front office, how big of a priority is it for you right now to really solidify that front four, as opposed to, we've just talked about a receiver, that go-to guy. The Bills are in much better cap situation than they were a year ago, but they ain't got the money to go sign a big-time wide receiver, to trade for a big-time edge, go sign a really, really good starting corner. They really don't have the cap room to be able to go do all that stuff. Where would you put the priority in terms of, you're going to lose probably Von Miller, He wasn't what you were hoped he was going to be. Injury that he suffered obviously played a big role in that. But based on what being said, you kind of feel like it's the end of the road here for Vaughn. And how big of a priority would you, how much resources would you allocate to try to strengthen a defensive line? That wasn't good enough against Kansas City.
Yeah, I agree with Brandon Beane that they're not one player away. I'd say they're like 4 players away because I think they can improve in the defensive backfield. They can improve on D line, and they need a weapon or two on offense. But it's so hard because 4 years in a row we're asking the question: how do the Bills beat the Chiefs? Right? Like what is missing to beat Kansas City? Is it a game breaking edge? To your point, is it a game breaking offensive weapon? I feel like they've gone the defensive route more so, at least in terms of the priority acquisitions, whether it be at the draft or in free agency. But watching that game Sunday, and quite frankly, watching the Baltimore game, I mean, I know they got the takeaways, but the Ravens moved the ball with at their will for the most part, especially in that second half. So there are areas of weakness on the D on the defense, and I mean, like they keep Von Miller himself is interesting because he keeps Rousseau off of his naturally strong side from a pass rush perspective, right? He's the one typically moving so they can rush Vaughn off the left.
Yeah.
So that's a curious piece of it too. I had a conversation with someone. I mean, on New Year's Eve, we're talking about the Bills. I was like, I think they're going either D line or maybe safety again at the draft. And again, this is weeks ago.
Yeah.
But I can't imagine that they don't stay defense with maybe their first 2 picks, just because I think they as good as DeMar Hamlin was and as serviceable as he was, they could probably upgrade on him. Whether or not Cole Bishop takes a job from Taylor Rapp, I don't know. But is Rasul Douglas coming back? Kaiir Elam cannot play another down, right?
I think he's
a nightmare. Yeah. So you need a.
You wouldn't know that by listening to those guys today, though, Chris. They sounded a lot. I get it. Yeah, support your guy. You don't kick him when he's down. But I was actually a little surprised to hear about how hard he still works and his attitude.
Yeah.
I was like, but no, you're right. And look, I think corner, actually, you brought up corner. I think Douglas walks. And I would say, this is what I want to ask you. Let's say you got a $20 to $25 million slot for a premier player. Are you using it on a defensive end or are you using it on a corner? And this is Chris, the GM.
Gosh, I think I'd probably go offense, as crazy as it is. I think the D is the issue. I think that's where they need to focus. But I'm at a loss for how they can beat this, how they can beat the Chiefs, how they can get over the hump. And if it's going to be a shootout every time, and it's been a shootout every time, might as well give Allen the best opportunity to do the job. And so
win 50 to 49.
I don't know what else to say. They have yet to have an answer from Mahomes. I just don't know. I don't know what, even even at his best before Miller was hurt, it's not that he's affecting the quarterback every single play. And a quarterback like Mahomes, he's just so surgical. I don't are you getting Darren Woodson, Rod Woodson, and Aeneas Williams, to fill out the defensive backfield?
Sure.
No, I know I'm dating myself here, but it's just what do we, I don't know. It's just so hard to say. I mean, I expect them to focus on D, but at this point, I'm I don't know, load up on offense and see what you come out the other side with.
It's a fun thing to think about loading up on the offense. However, I think your intuition is 1000% correct. I think they're going to spend a heavy amount of their resources, whether that's draft capital or salary cap room or trades, maybe even on defense. Because you look at that Chiefs game and that secondary. Now, look, Taylor Rapp out. That mattered. And Christian Benford really mattered. Him getting hurt, because that brought Kaiir Elam into the game. But Kaiir Elam just He's not good enough. All right. And DeMar Hamlin does some things well, but at the same token, you get in certain defenses, certain situations, they played 40% man for man, and he just got straight exposed. He's not a athletic safety. He can't do shit like that. That's not what he does. He can play center field. He can come up and help you with the run. He's a pretty sure tackler, but you want him to be, he was playing up in the box. They were so concerned about Cole Bishop getting confused and beat by play action that they had Cole hanging deep, and Hamlin kind of played Rapp's position for that game, and that didn't work out. Boy, or you can go defensive line, because here's my thing about the Bills. You're talking about Beane and the Chiefs. I think the biggest issue, and I know Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott both know this, your star players, especially on defense, have face planted in these games. Last year, not this year, last year, Ed Oliver, I went on about 3 weeks worth of rants about Ed Oliver. He face planted. He may as well not even put on a uniform last year against the Chiefs in the divisional round. That's how bad he was. Not the case this year. He played great. Here's the problem. Greg Rizzo, who was probably your best, most consistent defensive player on the football team this season, decided to no-show this past game against the Chiefs. He was hideous out there. By his standards, he was awful. No sacks, no pressures. He got caught off the edge in containment 4 times at least. He played terrible. And that gives you concern now, because he's going to have that 50-year option coming up. Do you give him $25 million? He's going to only be 26 years old when he's a free agent. He's going to get a monster contract. Or do you let him be the next Tremaine Edmonds and you let him walk? But here's the thing. You let him walk. Von Miller's old and washed. Now you are really weak at a position that Sean McDermott wants to be strong at. That's why I think they're going to continue to sink so much resources, especially draft capital, into that position.
Yeah, I agree. I think being realistic, that's the direction that they'll go, and they almost have to by necessity. Because even like at D tackle, I mean, is Dwayne Carter going to be able to step in and be a number one, playing nose tackle, or do you need to upgrade on him even so you have a little bit more of a rotation? I mean, I don't know what's DeQuan Jones's future going to look like? How much longer is he going to be? Can he be a difference maker? I think the depth chart on D necessitates that they have to focus on the defense. It's just, how many more times are we going to do this at the draft table, right? Like,
they got shittier contracts this time around for some of these guys that were not so clear cut. Last year, you cut Jordan Poyer. That's a no-brainer to them. You cut Trey White. That's a no-brainer. Great players, but no-brainers to cut them. Mitch Morse, a couple of these guys that they got rid of or just let walk in free agency were easy decisions because of the financial part of it. And it was easy to Brandon Beane, or maybe it was Sean, or actually it was Brandon. He talked about he cut 3 or 4 players last year, and bam, he got $33 million more in cap room. This time around, guys that we're talking about, like Von Miller, cutting him, you got to do some navigating and stuff, because the dead cap is huge. The savings aren't so much. I'm bringing this up because you mentioned DeQuan Jones. My first thought was, dude's old. He does some good things, but he's not the same player he was even at the beginning of last year. Then I looked at his contract. It's like they wouldn't save anything by cutting him right now. They would have to do a post-June 1st, and you can only do so many post-June 1st. It doesn't help you in the spring. So I don't know, man. Some of these contracts are bad. Kind of navigating to what Sean McDermott was talking about. And this was 2 things surprised me about what I thought he was pretty candid. I don't know if you got an opportunity to even hear him speak today, but he was pretty candid about the defensive line. He said they wanted the line at times, but not enough at others. And my thought as I'm hearing him speak is, I think defensive line is going to be the single biggest priority that the Bills have this offseason. It's just, it has to be. You got to find a way to, they kept talking about, we don't build a team to try to beat the Chiefs, because when the Chiefs aren't in the playoffs, but you're building a team to try to beat the Chiefs. I don't know who the hell you're fooling, who you're bullshitting there.
You got 3 teams to worry about in the AFC, and you're one of them. The other 2 are Baltimore and Kansas City.
100%.
Let's be honest with ourselves.
100%. Yeah. Quickly, too, he also mentioned, and by the way, he also pointed out Kincaid needing to get stronger. And then special teams. We don't talk about special teams much. It's whatever. But I thought I would have been willing to bet that Matthew Smiley was going to be the one guy who was going to get fired, because special teams almost week after week would do something. There'd be some kind of blunder. They give up a big return, which, by the way, they gave up a 41-yard kick return against the Chiefs Sunday that hurt them in that game. And the fake punch that we saw was against Denver. They've had a lot of mishaps on special teams this year. I thought Matthew Smiley was going to get fired, but Sean McDermott made it pretty damn clear today that Matthew Smiley is staying. Sean's loyal, if nothing else. Give him that, man. Especially if he likes you. I guess, look, here's my general takeaway of these guys today, and I want to get your thoughts on this too. Then we're going to some hockey. I didn't expect, visibly upset, despair, distress from either of these guys. But at the risk of being a little bit nitpicky here, it felt like the vibe was, we're good. Good season. We're in a great spot. We're good with being in the mix every year. And I'm not to say that they're not saying the right things. The only goal is to win the championship, this and that. Just follows a little bit easy peasy kind of vibes, chill vibes with, and maybe I'm just being a hater. I don't know. Maybe I'm more angry than Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott are, at least outwardly right now anyway, about how the season played out. But you kind of get a sense that, starting with ownership, that, hey, our goal is to win the championship. But if we keep getting to the playoffs every year and competed and consistently being good, as opposed to, a team that makes one run and then falls off for 3-4 years, we're good with that. I kind of got the sense they're almost a little too good with what the result was from Sunday. And maybe that's just me and I'm seeing it through a completely different glass.
I don't know if I got a good answer there. Because in some respects, I can understand where they're coming from. I am not a blame the refs guy, and I think there are bigger problems with that game than the fourth down spot or anything like that. But maybe they are looking at this and saying, listen, if we just had a game where we do get the bounces, or we do get we get the right calls in our favor, maybe we get over the hump. We are that close. Mm-hmm. I don't think that's completely unfair for them to look at it that way, but it's hard to square that with the absolute juggernaut that is the Chiefs, right? Next to no one's been able to knock them off. It's just, one thing after another of them being, just unkillable. And so just to have your kind of mindset be, we'll get there one of these days. We just got to keep the faith.
Keep knocking on the door, and eventually we'll kick it in. That's literally what they were talking about today.
Yeah, that's hard for me to get fully behind, just because, again, we talked about a little while ago, you had the ball with 3 minutes left, all 3 timeouts. Run a 4 minute. That's 4-minute drill, right? You're running your 4-minute offense, and yet James Cook doesn't start the drive. It's a whole nother topic of conversation. But you were in the position that you built yourself to be in, just like they were with 13 seconds. And then, they don't make the right call on the special team, on the kick. They don't make the right call defensively. We've litigated this a million times, but how many more times are you going to get back to that situation, get back to that matchup with the Chiefs, and be like, oh, well, if Tyler makes the kick, maybe we win the game. It would be nice to just let's go win one. Right. Yeah. Let's, I don't want to say sell out to win it, because then, you could be in cap shell again. And, but I don't know, it's hard to be fully behind it. Yeah. I understand the point of view. But Josh Allen's window is only going to be open for so long. And I hate to think of burning any year of his tenure with the Bills with the idea of we'll just keep kicking on that door, because maybe it was 3 years between AFC championship berths. It's not easy. It's not easy to get there.
People, you don't want to talk about it, you don't want to jinx it, but year after year after year after year, the way Josh plays, it's like you're one of these years.
Yeah,
that injury luck is not going to go his way. It's just that's a fact. The way he plays, I hope I'm wrong. It's the way he plays football. I guess it comes down to this. You can look at it at the optimistic point of view. 2 straight years now, they've had the ball on a chance at the end of the game. They could have won both these games. Let's just say that. They could have won this year. They absolutely could have won and should have won last year. despite things like last year, the defense was banged up and they just couldn't play. This year, the defense sucked. This year, the offense made some mistakes. Lots of things like that. But bottom line, if you're optimistic, you could have been the Chiefs the last 2 years. So the whole keep knocking at the door, eventually, somebody's going to answer. I get that. That's the optimistic point of view. The pessimistic point of the view is I think the last 2 years, the Bills have been the better football team than the Kansas City Chiefs. 1-53, I'm talking about. The difference is the stars step up for the Chiefs, and their coaching just gets masterful this time of year. Out coaching the Bills. I've been fighting with people on Twitter all week long. I don't even know how anyone can debate it. The Chiefs outcoach the Bills in this football game. Last question, and I want to wrap up with some Sabres stuff. Do you personally, look back at this season now the season's over, and do you consider this a success for the Buffalo Bills?
Oh, for sure. No question. I think you got it back to the AFC Championship, so you took a step, right?
Yeah.
That was a bugaboo for the last couple of years. So at the very least, you take solace in that. You can be optimistic about that step forward. And the other thing, I remember talking to people at the beginning of the year. I was like, they'll still win the division probably. Maybe they're going to be a 10-win team. Me and Joe from Queens were arguing about it. I'm like, they'll win 10 games. Don't worry about it. And then they won more, right? With the idea that this was a step back season, all of the preseason nonsense about the Jets and the Dolphins, the Bills exceeded expectations.
Sure.
So in that sense, yes, it was a good season. It was a season that you can take a lot of positives away from. If you are only judging off trophies, which given where they are, I understand that you might do that, then yes, of course you'd say, well, they didn't get to the top of the mountain. But big picture, I think in terms of how this season was supposed to go, kind of that soft reset, they blew expectations out of the water. But until they win some silverware, maybe it won't matter to most people. So, which I get. But
I agree 100% with you. I think beating the Ravens in the divisional round, getting over that hump, I thought made this season 100% a success. Unfortunately, there's still going to be some narratives that linger. Sean can't win the big one. Josh can't beat the Chiefs, all that stuff. So that part of it's shitty. But to get over the hump and get past the divisional round in a year that most thought, at least in the summertime anyway, that you weren't going to be able to even come close to that, let alone beat Baltimore in a divisional round and get to another AFC championship. All in all, I absolutely would consider this a success. Not as much successful. The Buffalo Sabres. Kind of want to talk about this for a handful of minutes here, kind of from an angle of, like I said, a hardcore Bills fan who's more of a casual Sabres fan, and now the season's over. They want something to cling on to, something to cheer for. So now they're going to start to make their way over downtown and start following the Sabres a little more closely. Now, look, nobody's that blind and stupid that they don't know that the Sabres are terrible this season. We get that. But I want to make sure I say this right. When I think of the Sabres, because I've been locked in on the Bills. Now, look, I've watched a handful of Sabres games. I went on some rants. I literally had an entire podcast episode. The title of it was, "Oh my God, I hate the Buffalo Sabres." That was literally the entire episode that I did, I don't know, 6 weeks or so ago. But anyway, I didn't pay all that much attention, okay? Just, I read your tweets. I followed some hockey guys, and that's how I kind of keep up with the Sabres. It's like growing up for me, like say in my old neighborhood in the West Side, all right? And the Sabres being my old neighborhood, all right? And I loved it, man. I remember loving the Sabres so much for so long. The good, the bad, the ugly of it. You grew up in the neighborhood that you love, then you leave. And then you come back years later. In this case, it would be months later. I'm talking about going into the season. Like, I know the Sabres weren't good last year. They fired Granado, but I felt good about the Sabres going into this season with Lindy Ruff. So it's like my own neighborhood, man. I'm pumped to go see my neighborhood. And I get back to my neighborhood and it's just run down. It sucks. Businesses are closed. Boards are up all over on the houses, boarded houses all over the place. It's just, you don't want to be there anymore. It's like, what the hell am I even doing here? That's how I feel about the Buffalo Sabres right now, man. This is a team that is last in the Eastern Conference by 7 points. Why does it feel, catch people up here, man. Why does it feel like, even with Lindy Ruff, which was supposed to be a big deal for this team and turning it around, why does it just feel so much more like more of the same this year, even with Lindy Ruff?
Well, it's interesting too because they turned over enough of the roster that you'd think there would be a bit more
Hmm.
change. They whole new fourth line. They bring in another NHL centerman and Ryan McLeod. So like they made some changes that you would expect to maybe try to clear out some of the shortcomings that the roster had in the previous season. But the issue to me is a lot of the same things that plagued them last year, where their special teams are killing them on a nightly basis, and now their goaltending's not that great this year compared to last year.
Yeah.
So it's a bit of a whack-a-mole situation where they try to address two or three things that they felt failed them last year, but now two or three new things have popped up this year which are failing them. Again, like power play especially, that hasn't changed. They brought a new coach in to run it, and Seth Appert, but by and large, the issues that plagued them last year on the power play are following them this year. So like, it's I guess like, and there's underperforming players who they needed to perform better, like Dylan Cousins and Jack Quinn,
Yeah.
where Cousins had a down year last year, but the year before that earned him that big deal. He was tremendous, and so the hope was, the expectation was, okay, new coach, that this maybe will help get his feet back under him. And Jack Quinn had been hurt so much last year. When he was in the lineup, he was really good, and now he's been terrible. So you have two pieces of your top six that are just not are just not pulling their weight. So that's going to hurt you too in a big way. And for all of the roster movement that Adams did pull off in the offseason, the remade fourth line was a big talking point. I mentioned Ryan McLeod. They still have yet to get a partner for Owen Power, and by and large, the defensive core outside of Darlene Power and then Bowen Byram when he's with Darlene, uh, you know, that's half of your D core is a liability on most nights. So like there are still so many holes that weren't addressed or that they couldn't address, that even with Lindy Ruff coming in, a new coach and hopefully a new vibe, they just it hasn't been enough to turn things around.
What is your assessment right now of Lindy Ruff and how he's doing this season? Again, he inherited a team that had more holes on it than I think the average person thought. And actually, before we even get to Lindy, let me ask you this: on their lowest floor, and I know we're talking about the Buffalo Sabres, who have been really low several times, but based on what you've seen the last couple of years from this team, even that lowest floor, could you have imagined that we're 50 games in now? It's literally the end of January. You're about to get into February here in Western New York, and the Sabres are literally dead last in the Eastern Conference. And I think they're in dead last by like 7 points right now as we record this. Even on the lowest floor, did you imagine that being realistic at
Oh, no
all?
way. Not even
Yeah.
close. Like I mean, and they've been, the Sabres have been part of this group in the Eastern Conference with the Red Wings and the Senators for a few years now, where,
Mhm.
and the Canadians are kind of in the conversation too, where people are like, if they can do this, maybe they'll get over the hump this year. So they've been kind of a sexy pick to get their shit together. And they haven't. But I thought, because last year they were in the conversation late last year. Not like they were 2 years ago when they just missed, but
Sure.
the East was such a bad conference last year, especially in the middle. The Sabres stayed alive, and then they won a couple games at the right time, and so they put themselves in the hunt, right? And so that was encouraging, even though they weren't really a serious playoff contender. At least they kept themselves in the conversation late in the year, much like they had the year before. So even though they had taken a step back from a points perspective, obviously it cost Granato his job, but there were again reasons for optimism. So this year with Ruff coming in, and even if you didn't believe in Lindy Ruff as a viable option for them,
Mhm.
you should, I think at the very least you would have expected them to be in that like 10, 11, 12 range in the East,
Yeah.
just tread water. To be dead last in the East by a fair margin, you meant 7 points, you said, and be a hell of a lot closer to the draft lottery than the wild card is very surprising. And I think, and quite frankly, Lindy Ruff has to own some of it, has to wear some of it. I know a lot of people are kind of like, oh, I feel bad for Lindy. It's too bad he's come back to this. Like, he's at the helm of for this thing.
Sure.
He's directing traffic, and they keep giving up leads left and right. He's
Yeah.
got to wear some of it.
For sure. Sometimes a player or coach, whatever, they get to that point where they're just not they're not what they used to be anymore. And you get to a decision time, which do you feel like, all right, let's just say things don't dramatically change for the better right now. They don't even necessarily have to get worse. Not that they can get much worse, but let's just say they're doing what they're doing right now. They're in last in the conference. Maybe they get up to 14th at the end of the season or something like that. Does it feel to you like Lindy Ruff is trending towards being one and done, whether that's Terry Bagula deciding to move on from him after just 1 year, which I want to be real clear, I would be stunned if that happened. Or if Lindy Ruff just says after 1 year, you know what? I don't want to do this team. I can't win with these guys, whatever. I'm going to get out of this job now after 1 year. Do you feel like he's trending towards a one and done?
I feel like, knowing what we know about Terry Pagula, especially how he runs the Sabres and has run the Sabres last number of years, I would assume not. I think, they signed him for a 2-year deal, so
Right.
it's easy to get out. It's not as if they're dealing with a contract where they just gave him a 5-year deal to come back,
Sure.
and now you're dealing, with a big buyout or anything like that. So the avenue exists to get him out of there. My concern with that idea is, if you're going to fire Lindy Ruff, you've got to clean house, not just with Kevin Adams too, but like, we can talk about that in a minute, but like, just speaking of the coaching staff specifically, if Ruff is out, you've got to clean out all of the coaches. It
Mhm.
wouldn't make any sense to me. And quite frankly, one of the reasons why an in-season coaching change wouldn't be that big of a deal to me is because I don't know or trust that Seth Appert's an answer. He hasn't proven to be all that forceful on changing their power play around. Is he going to be able to manage the whole thing, right?
Right.
So if Ruff's gone, you better hope that the entire staff is gone, and I don't know if that's a realistic option either. um and again, like, the real conversation is cleaning out the entire hockey department. I know Mike Harrington's mentioned it a few times, but like, I mean, that's, you can't give Kevin Adams another chance to hire another coach. It's been 5 years. If it's
Right.
not going to work this year, like, what are we doing here, letting this guy keep running it? So I would assume they're going to bring Ruff back. I mean, the players have said the right things, but I feel like they say the right things about all the coaches, and then at the end of the season, that's when you learn about the exit interviews. But they asked for accountability last year, and I don't sense that they're all that more accountable for their actions given how these games go.
Yeah.
But to answer your question, if I was running it, yeah, no, I don't think Ruff should come back. But it strikes me that I think Adam's job is safe, and therefore I would assume Ruff's job is safe. But
This might be a tough question to answer, but and not even just this year, or even so much last year. This is years running now, and we're talking about 2 years ago where the Sabres literally just barely missed the playoffs. And I think, looking back, the biggest reason why is because they weren't better at home. Why is this hockey team so shitty at home? There's a lot of bad teams in the league, but they can't win to save their lives on the road, and they play pretty damn well at home. And that's, it keeps them at least somewhat respectable. But the Sabres are 9-14-2 at home. Like, why has this team been so bad at home now for so many years running? Again, maybe that's a rhetorical question. Is the leadership group on this team, or they slowed, not being able to keep a lead, the goaltending, the crowd being dead at times, which I don't blame them. It's, why is this team so bad at home, man?
it's honestly, it's perplexing to me because you know sometimes you hear about teams, and whether it's a football team, basketball team, anyone, where the coach or the manager will be like, you know what, we're going to stay in a hotel tonight. We're going to treat this like a road game because we're playing so poorly at home. And like, I don't even think it's that, where like they're too comfortable sleeping in their own beds or whatever. Like, I do think part of it, and this is not, please do not misinterpret this as me saying that it's the fans' fault,
Mhm.
but I do think part of it is that we have now become very conditioned as Sabres fans that they are going to let us down and that they're going to play poorly. And Buffalo is also a very passionate hockey market. So we know what we're watching, we know what we're seeing, and if they have a garbage night on the power play, the fans are going to let them know it. If the goaltender sucks, they're going to let them know it, right? So like, maybe we're a little bit faster to boo than they would be in, say, Anaheim,
Mhm.
or a more non-traditional market. So like, but I do think that the heightened atmosphere of expectations in Buffalo plays a role. And so it's certainly plausible that the players go into home games. It's already a tough season, right? or they get in a little skid. You lose your first two, you lose your opener, you don't play that well. And then it's like, oh, Jesus, like these guys are going to be on my ass all night. I'm going to hear the guy behind the bench who's there every friggin' night hollering at me or hollering at Lindy, and it's the last thing I want to hear. So I do think that plays a role. I do think that there's a little bit of the pressure of the expectations could be getting to these guys, whereas they go on the road, nobody knows them, especially if they go to a market where it's either like a really large market like New York,
Sure.
or one where hockey's not as ingrained in the culture of the region, where they're anonymous too. And so if they get in the night before, like let's say they go to Seattle and they get in the night before, they can enjoy a night downtown Seattle and no one's going to bother them, or Vancouver or wherever. Vancouver, maybe not, but people might recognize him in Vancouver. But generally the point stands of like,
yeah,
like Chris Drury would even say like, oh, people come up to me and ask me about the power play at Wegmans. It's like the last thing I want to do. and then, but if you go down to Raleigh in North Carolina, they might not care at all. So like, I do think a little bit of that plays a factor of just, we all care a lot. We want them to do well, and we get frustrated if they don't.
Right.
But other than that, like they got to sage that building or something, man. It's just the bad juju in there. Something's going on. I don't get it. It's unbelievable that they can't perform on these home games on such a regular basis.
Two more things that I wanted to ask you here. One, what's your take right now on what's going on with Vancouver and Elias Pettersson, and where do you think the Sabres stand with that? And for a lot of, again, let's just say casual Sabre fans who only follow the team, they don't follow the league. I'll put you on the spot here because you're a football guy, you're a hockey guy. For people who might not even know who the hell he is, give me an NFL comparison if the Bills were going to make a trade for somebody on the level that Elias Pettersson would mean if they were the Sabres were able to land them. Like if the Bills were looking around the league, who are they trading for, the Bills that go on the roster that you would kind of make comparable for people who may not know much about Pettersson or his game or anything like that?
Ooh, that's a tough one.
I know it is. I just thought of it on the fly.
I mean, in a way, I might even like kind of draw a comparison to the Stephon Diggs trade, because Pettersson is a very dynamic talent. He's 2 years removed from a 100-point season. He's been dealing with some knee issues, which spook me, quite frankly. Like, it's my biggest fear if the Sabres were to trade for him is that this knee tendonitis just doesn't go away. But he was an 80-point guy last year, so he had some good production even last year. Production hasn't been that great this year overall, but big picture, like the talent profile is that of a really dynamic 200-foot player. Excellent playmaker. When he's shooting, he's a good finisher. But he's got a lot of talent. He brings a lot to the table. He would give the Sabres a talent, a dynamic element that they haven't had, quite frankly, since Jack Eichel's been here. As good as Tage Thompson is, Pettersson's a different profile. He would completely change the dynamic of their forward group, especially if he's healthy, especially if he can get back to where he was or even close to where he was. So like in that respect, I would draw some comparisons to the Diggs trade, because the Bills got Diggs. They did not have like a top end receiver weapon. And he was a little disgruntled, and Pettersson's a little disgruntled right now. There's a really interesting dynamic and drama going on in Vancouver right now between him and JT Miller. I like the Daily Hive is a website out in Vancouver, and they have like a full rundown of the drama. Like every single run-in that these two guys have had publicly, they've accounted for it, which was helpful because there were things I didn't know about.
That's wild.
Yeah, so like there's a little bit of that too, where Pettersson I wouldn't qualify as like a diva, which I know a lot of people like to tag Diggs with, but overall, there's a little animosity there with the current team. His current team, Vancouver's kind of realizing like, okay, we might need to make some changes here to our group, and move on from either him, Miller, or both. So I think that there's enough comparisons, enough similarities there where I would maybe compare it to Diggs. Overall, though, I would think of it more from a perspective of, if you're looking for the NFL perspective of like pulling a trade for a really dynamic playmaking talent. that you're lacking. And so whether that's a receiver, a D end, running back, whatever. But Pettersson, he's an exciting player. From everything I've been able to pull away from the reporting on it, it sounds like the Sabres have the pieces that Vancouver wants. I think it's just a matter of Kevin Adams getting the job done here and getting one over the finish line. And whether that means he's got to pay a tiny bit more in terms of like a draft pick value or a prospect, it strikes me that if Dylan Cousins and Bowen Byram are the pivot points, are like the two key principles, that if the Sabres really want this, I think they can get it.
Kevin Adams, before we wrap here, I get a sense, Chris, I could be wrong, but I get a sense that you think there's a relatively good, I'm asking you this, like relatively good chance that Kevin Adams survives what's going on right now? Because my first thought when I'm hearing about a trade, especially one of this magnitude, let alone anything that's going to happen of significance, let's say before the trade deadline, okay? Throw out a pending unrestricted free agent rental player that the Sabres will get a 4th round pick for, or something like that, something small. But a trade that matters, a trade of substance. Do you want Kevin Adams handling that trade, knowing that, this dude may not be here to see how things play out? Do you feel that there's a relatively good chance, despite the fact that the Sabres in his 5th year as GM are dead last in the East, that the Kevin Adams era in Buffalo may not be over?
It should be, quite frankly. I mean, you oversee, you look back on this summer and, he had quotes like, the time is now, this, kind of like this win now mode mentality. He made a big deal about what he needed to do to change the team. We're going to reshape our identity. We're going to reshape our 4th line. Lindy Ruff's going to bring accountability. And so far, 2/3 of the 4th line did not play the other night against Boston. One of them was in Rochester. One of them was a healthy scratch. Lindy Ruff's coaching so far has brought about an astonishing rate of scoring first and then surrendering leads. The power play changes have not been fixed, as I mentioned. And just overall, the roster is just not good enough. And so all of those things in the 5th year of a GM's tenure would suggest that he should be fired. And then you add in a absolutely abysmal 13-game losing streak and just barreling headfirst into a bottom 5 finish. Like, no GM would survive that. And so I never say never. It's entirely possible that if this season finishes and the Sabres are 28th or 30th, that they could very easily move away from Adams. That Pegula would be like, no, it's a bridge too far. We got to move on. But my gut says that they're going to let him stick this thing out. He's going to get another year. And I think there's a whole lot of reasons for that. Not the least of which being Terry Pegula does just not trust many hockey people right now. But yeah, I think Adams is going to get to drive the bus at the deadline. I think he's probably going to be there for the draft. He shouldn't be. Again, I think his resume is not that of a successful GM, but just based on the available evidence, I think he's still here.
Last question for you. I want to respect your time and I want to respect everyone who's listening's time. I'm down a rabbit hole right now where I could keep you on here for another hour really, really easily. But let me finish by asking you this. You mentioned Terry Pegula. You're somebody, like I said, you write about the Buffalo Sabres. Your podcast primarily is about, the Buffalo Sabres. What's your frustration level, if any, when it comes to Terry Pegula as Sabres owner, not Buffalo Bills owner, as Buffalo Sabres owner? What frustration do you have, if any, that you never hear from him, that you don't, he went to Montreal a handful of weeks ago, whatever it was ago. It's the whole, the solution is in the room. That quote kind of took on a life of its own. But that aside, you don't hear, he didn't tell it to the media. That was reported that he told that to his players. But are you frustrated with the fact that he's never accessible and available to the media? You never hear from him. You never hear what he's thinking when it comes to this hockey team. Does that frustrate you? And if so, how much?
It doesn't frustrate me a lot, only because anytime the guy speaks in public, he puts his foot in his mouth.
Very
And
true.
he almost never says the right thing. Even if he's trying to do the right thing, it comes across terribly. And apparently he says it in the locker room too, because he went and did that locker room meeting and then they lost 6-1 the next night. So like, with respect to like him never being visible, I almost think like, can we see him less than we do? Because like you hear things like, Adams is always like, oh, we talk every day. He's involved in decisions. The Sabres staff are in, well, I don't know if they're back now, but they, at least early in the week, were in Boca with Pagula, I assume
Mhm.
for trade deadline preparations. Or maybe they could be getting signed off on Pedersen. Who knows? That'd be great. But like, it strikes me that whatever involvement he does have is more on the back end. I don't know if he's making hockey decisions or how much influence he has in that respect. But given how it's gone, I think what would be best is if Terry Pagula would cut a few more checks, right? Let's spend to the salary cap maybe once. Let's give it a try. Um, Maybe clean the arena up a bit more than you have. But we don't need you at the scouting meetings. We don't need you. Again, it's his baby. I get it. If the Sabres are his favorite,
Mhm.
but like favorite team. Um, but like it's like I'm fine not hearing from him, quite frankly, because again, I don't need to hear his opinions on the forecheck, if you will. But like I would like him to be a little bit more of an absentee owner in some respects, but just invest. Put more investment into the team. That's where my issue with Pagula is that they haven't been spent to the cap in, I think, 5 years now, if not longer. There have been seasons where they've gotten to the cap floor by taking dead money, and that money's paid by insurance for the most part. So like his investment in the Sabres has not been that tremendous. And it strikes me that that's both on the roster and then like outside like the hockey department. So like that's where I would want to see more from Bagula, less so than like holding press conferences, and more so just like showing that he is willing to spend and invest in the club.
Very, very reasonable. I'll tell you what, I'm not lying, Chris. I could easily go 2.5 hours feeling some good vibes here, talking Bills and Sabres with you. But we'll end the show for today there. I want everybody, especially if you're a Sabres fan, if you haven't been there already, make sure you go check out Two in the Box. And we're recording this Thursday. I know you just dropped a new post covering a variety of things, including some trade deadline stuff. And Two in the Box today being Thursday. So make sure you go check that out. Again, the Instigator Podcast with Chris and Tyler. Make sure you're following Chris on Twitter at 2ITB. Why you got to make your Twitter handle difficult to say? It's easy to spell out, it's easy to write out, but to say it's 2ITB _ Buffalo.
Two in the Box was taken. All right. When I signed up, there was another sports blog named Two in the Box. I can't help it.
I appreciate you very much, Chris.
No, thanks, man. I appreciate it. This was great. I hope we can do it again.
And I'll be back on Sunday night to tape for Monday. I'll have Joe from Queens with me. Now that Bills season's over, we'll see if he could get back to hating on the sports media and all kinds of other stuff. Talk to you guys then. Have a good weekend.